10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. MDS, we have ignition, we have a liftoff.
On September 5th, 1977, Voyager 1 launched into outer space. This unmanned spacecraft would capture the world, our world, like nothing else ever had before.
The Voyager mission is one of the coolest things that NASA has ever done. It's been wonderful to watch it unfold over half a century.
Joel Achenbach is a science reporter for The Post. He's been following Voyager's journey for decades.
The Voyager 1 is our scout in the universe. It is leading point for humanity in the exploration of the universe.
Over the last 50 years, Voyager 1 and its twin spacecraft Voyager 2 have been drifting farther and farther out into space. They've sent back one-of-a-kind images and data about places that humans will probably never reach. Voyager 1 is now more than 15 billion miles away from Earth. No man-made object has ever made it further into the unknown.
It's taught us a lot about ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we? What's our position in the cosmic scheme of things?
Right now, Voyager is flying in the interstellar medium into a unique region, and so we're getting new information about a place that no one has ever been before.
This is Linda Spilker, Voyager's chief scientist based at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in California. Late last year, Spilker and Voyager's whole team faced one of the most serious crises in the history of the Voyager program. The spacecraft stopped sending back data. It went dark, billions of miles away.
All of a sudden, we were just getting the equivalent of a tone, like a dial tone. It was just sending a repeating pattern of zeros and ones that no longer contained information about the science or about the engineering.
This recent anomaly was the most serious risk that seemed to have a real danger of ending the functional utility of this spaceship.
When I first heard about this, I felt a pang of genuine sadness, which is weird to say about a space probe that launched 11 years before I was born. I think it's because, in some ways, Voyager represents humanity at its best, at its most enterprising and its most curious. We're living in what can feel like a fractious, difficult moment. But I think it's also really important at a time like this to remember to look up and see what else the universe has to offer us. From the newsroom of the Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm your guest host, Chris Velasco. It's Wednesday, July 17th. Today, we leave Earth behind for a little while and step into the great unknown. We tell the story of how Voyager 1 wound up more than 15 billion miles away from home, and how a group of scientists at NASA are trying desperately to keep it with us. My colleague Elahe Izadi spoke to Joel Achenbach. I'll let the two of them take it from here.
Joel, today we're here to talk about Voyager 1. And can you just take me to the beginning of the story?
What happened was someone figured out that the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, were going to be in a configuration where you could potentially send a spacecraft to visit all four of them. And NASA said, yeah, let's do that. So this is the early 70s. I think the idea really germinated around 1970 or 1971, 72 period. Keep in mind, we were putting people on the moon then.
Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down about the fourth rung up.
It was the heyday of the space age where it seemed anything was possible.
Touchdown, we have touchdown.
And along comes this fortuitous and very rare situation where the planets were in the right place to maybe visit all four of those outer planets. You keep in mind, the solar system is a pretty big place. You can't send a spacecraft one direction and have it turn around and go all the way across the solar system the other side. You have to kind of wait till the planets are in the right place.
Wow. So that was sort of the idea originally, was to capture this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to examine and look at aspects of our solar system that were previously undiscovered. What did this craft even look like?
Voyager 1 was roughly the size of a small car. It weighed a couple thousand pounds. It had this big dish, like a satellite dish, which was the dominant feature. Gave it a little bit of a flying saucer look, but it was sprouting all these instruments, these antennas, these booms, and there was 11 instruments on the thing. So it had a real sort of science, gadgety, highly engineered look to it. And interestingly, it had this record stuck on the outside.
Like a vinyl record?
It's not a vinyl record. It's a gold-plated copper record, and now known as the Golden Record, attached to the spaceship with instructions of how to play it. Astronomer Carl Sagan, who I think was the most famous popularizer of the idea that there's life in the universe, intelligent life out there, that there could be intelligent species that we could even communicate with, Carl Sagan and his friends and colleagues decided that Voyager should carry messages to the universe because it would be out there beyond the outer planets. Who knows? Maybe someone would want to know, who created these spaceships, or, where did they come from? And so they created a record that contains all kinds of sounds of Earth. Wind, thunderstorms, waves crashing, animal noises, greetings in 55 languages.
Bonjour tout le monde.
यखिदाई हुई अनाउर अकनोइज़ोइज़
धरती के वासियों की ओर से नमस्कार.
It's got a lot of music on it. It's got something called flowing streams, a composition that's almost, several thousand years old. It's got Chuck Berry. In case someone wants to know more about us and happens upon these Voyager spacecraft, the aliens are going to learn a lot about Earth. They will learn a lot about what a small group of people in 1977 thought was a representation of humanity.
Well, it's just so fascinating because it speaks to this feeling of the unknown and an interest in preserving something and exploration of let's introduce ourselves to whoever or whatever finds this. So can you tell me about the launch of Voyager and what did people from that time remember from that moment?
Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched in 1977. The reason there were two of them is because back then, a lot of things would go wrong with a rocket launch.
Very smooth flight, very, very small attitude disturbances.
Voyager 1 was launched on September 5th of 1977.
Vibration levels appear to be very low.
They were thrilled and just joyous that it went off as planned perfectly, and this spaceship was on the way to this journey to the outer planets. I talked to Linda Spilker, who is today the chief scientist, the project scientist for the Voyager mission.
It was sort of a chance for me and for the people on the team to be armchair explorers, to go and visit these worlds and to see places really, that no one had ever seen before, and really start to understand and put together the pieces of the puzzle as far as where are we in the solar system and in the grander scheme of things.
She has a long relationship with the Voyager project because she started working on it in 1977, the year the two Voyagers launched.
They said, well, we're going to hire you. And I said, well, I have never heard of Voyager. Where is Voyager going? And they said, well, Jupiter and Saturn, and if all goes well, on to Uranus and Neptune. And at that moment, I said, sign me up. That's where I want to go. growing up at a time when we were sending people into space and ultimately landing, humans on the moon. That was so tremendously exciting. And during that time, I actually had a small telescope. I got it as a Christmas present in third grade, and I used it to look at, in particular, at Jupiter and Saturn, because I could see those little dots of light for the Jovian moons, and depending on Saturn's orientation, might get a glimpse of the rings. And I decided I want to do something in space.
I think it's interesting hearing what Linda has to say of this idea of these scientists getting to be armchair explorers. So Voyager launches. Where did it go? And, in the original telling, my understanding is it was only supposed to be out there for a few years. So what were the turning points in its voyage, and why is it out there now for 50 years?
The primary mission of the Voyager program was to look at the 4 outer planets and their moons. And what they really wanted was to see these places up close.
Did they?
They did. They saw them up close, and they discovered a lot.
What did they discover?
They discovered many new moons. They discovered a ring around Jupiter, a new ring around Saturn.
I remember when Voyager launched, the thinking was, okay, the moons are going to look a lot like our own moon. They'll be these kind of heavily cratered, kind of ancient worlds.
Again, here's Dr. Linda Spilker, the project scientist for Voyager.
And so I remember getting to Jupiter, and there was Callisto. Yeah, lots of craters, and its surface looked pretty old. Next up was Ganymede. Ganymede, not so many craters, and had this fractured, interesting terrain, and looked different. It didn't look like our own moon. And then Europa, oh my goodness, this bright, white, icy world with essentially hardly any craters and just these fractures and cracks. And it was bright, white, and icy. It didn't look like our moon at all. And then, of course, the Jupiter system was Io, a moon that looked kind of, all these different colors of yellow and orange and red with active volcanoes going off. And you're all, wow, our ideas about moons have radically changed in just this one series of flybys. And so it continued.
So we know a lot about these places because of the Voyagers. But eventually, once you get beyond Neptune, there's not a whole lot out there for a while. Now, let me bring up one other interesting moment, though.
Mm-hmm.
Voyager 1, it's past the orbit of Neptune. It's out there. It's about 3.7 billion miles from Earth. And Carl Sagan, among others, said, let's turn it around and look back at the Earth. So in 1990, NASA decided to turn Voyager's camera back around and took an image. It became very famous, the pale blue dot image showing Earth. And it was just a tiny little dot, this little speck in deepest space. It was kind of a stunning, humbling moment to see, that is our home world right there from 3.7 billion miles away.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only other thing I actually confess I know about this. It was like a moment of poetry, that image.
I was lucky enough to interview Sagan before he passed. And, he did have this element of poetry about him. And probably his most famous line, his most famous discussion of where we are in the universe comes from that image, the pale blue dot image. Talking about that image and saying, look, that's us, that's home. Everyone who's ever lived, everyone who's ever fallen in love.
Everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering.
Everyone who's ever had a dream lived on that little pale blue dot, a single pixel from an image taken by Voyager 1.
Every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam.
I think that remark by Sagan, that insight, will stand the test of time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's remarkable that it was from this moment where the Voyager is just past, it's multiple billions of miles away from Earth, but looking back at Earth. Now, can you tell me about interstellar space? What exactly is interstellar space, and how does the Voyager end up in it?
When it passed Jupiter, it got a gravity boost. You pass close to a really large, massive object like Jupiter, it'll speed you up. And it essentially got slung out of the inner solar system.
Like a slingshot?
Exactly, like a slingshot, accelerated these spacecraft to the point where they could leave the solar system, escape the gravity well of the sun.
We didn't know where the boundary was exactly until we got there, and we crossed it. And Voyager 1 crossed that boundary in 2012. We didn't know exactly what to expect.
The sun has an atmosphere. It sends out the solar wind that goes out very, very far, way past the orbits of Neptune and Pluto. But there comes a point where it dissipates. And beyond that, what happens is you enter a different realm where, believe it or not, space is actually more dense with particles. Once you get beyond this bubble created by the sun, you're in a different realm of what they call interstellar space, and you're exposed to what is, frankly, a much harsher environment. And the Voyagers have these 4 instruments that can help the scientists understand that environment and even kind of monitor odd things happening out there. They can measure the amount of dust, the amount of cosmic rays out there, the changes in the magnetic field. And until you send a spacecraft out there, you don't know what that environment is actually like. The Voyagers are the first ones to go out there and actually measure what that interstellar medium is like.
Okay, so Voyager has reached the far extent of wherever we've gone before. Can you tell me about what happened with Voyager last year?
On November 14th of last year, something really odd happened. The signal from Voyager just essentially went silent. It still had radio contact with the big telescopes on the ground, the Deep Space Network, but there was no information, just random zeros and ones. All the science data just flatlined.
And it was kind of the feeling like, oh my goodness, wow, this is going to be a tough one because we don't have any information.
And after a couple of weeks, they got, I think, pretty alarmed, to the point of scared. And that's when the Jet Propulsion Laboratory leadership said, let's put together a team to figure out why Voyager 1 has gone silent.
After the break, the all-hands-on-deck effort to bring Voyager 1 back online. That's coming up.
So once scientists lost Voyager's signal, what did they do? Can you walk me through how they tried to reestablish connection or figure out what the problem was?
Talk about a daunting task. They're trying to fix a computer on a spaceship that is 15 billion miles away.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about all the times my parents call me to fix their computer. And I'm trying to do it over the phone and just what you said.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. The difference is that when you're talking to your parents, you're in real time. With Voyager 1, it's so far away that even at the speed of light, it takes 22 and a half hours to send a signal one way. And then it takes another 22 and a half hours to get the response. So they would send a signal on a Friday, and then on a Sunday afternoon, they would see, well, okay, what did Voyager 1 have to say in response? So you're talking, 45 hours of delay in this conversation. So it took a lot of patience.
It was a long time to wait and not have the information we really wanted to have. There was concern that maybe something else would fail or go wrong in the meantime.
Again, here's Dr. Linda Spilker, who I spoke with.
We were worried most about the health and safety of the spacecraft. Was everything still operating? It would just be a loss, just all of the unique science information about the interstellar medium.
So the Jet Propulsion Laboratory put together a task force. They called it a Tiger Team of their best, smartest, most innovative, most creative engineers to figure out how they could understand what had gone wrong with Voyager 1 and potentially fix it.
The way it happened was my immediate manager, my group supervisor, came into my office and sat down and said, "This is something I'm sure you're not going to expect, but Voyager, we've lost communication with Voyager. They're forming a Tiger Team. Would you like to join the Tiger Team?" And it was a shock to me.
I talked to David Cummings, a software engineer who was on that Tiger Team.
Basically, I said, how can you pass up an opportunity to work on Voyager? So yes, I would be happy to drop what I'm doing now. It sounded very interesting and exciting, but also daunting, for sure, daunting.
Voyager is such a special mission that people were determined to save this spacecraft. I mean, they could have let it go, but no, they were going to figure this out some way. They kept trying to come up with, first of all, to figure out where was the problem.
It's a very old-style computer, and there are a lot of challenges with that code that don't exist on more modern spacecraft.
And for several months, they got nowhere. Nothing worked. There were some moments of, frankly, despair.
My reaction was tremendous disappointment and depression.
What do you do when you have a silent spaceship that then does not respond to various commands, and it's just out there being totally enigmatic? What is wrong? So they had a couple of big moments. One was in February when they realized that although Voyager was not sending back data, there was enough of a change in the radio transmission that was coming to Earth that they realized that the system was still functioning in a way that they might be able to manipulate it.
There were a number of steps to try. We began methodically going through those steps, and lo and behold, we figured out that one of those data modes was sending back something very interesting.
They recognized that one of the commands that went up from Earth to Voyager had kind of, kicked it into a different mode a little bit. I mean, it's a little more sophisticated than kicking a vending machine to get the Coca-Cola to come out. But they realized that they did something that got a response, and they're like, hey, there's hope.
Oh, because it means like it's responsive. It's not completely dead.
It means that one of their commands had a result. I will be honest here. It is such a complicated technical feat that they did that almost anything I say about this, I'm going to get it wrong, okay?
Okay.
But they eventually came up with a way to determine that there was a single chip that had been somehow either damaged by a cosmic ray or it had just gotten old, but it was no longer working correctly. And that single chip threw off everything else about the computer that was critical for sending any kind of usable data back to Earth. But it was a very, very painstaking process of essentially moving computer memory to a different location in the computer. And it wasn't something you could just do with one command. It still took them months. But the big moment came in April when they sent up a message or a command, and 2 days later.
So we're sitting there on the day in April when we're expecting to get these signals, and it was nerve-wracking.
You could have heard a pin drop. It was quiet. Everyone was focused on the screen, watching that clock count down to that minute when we'd start getting information back.
I was so nervous as to whether or not we were going to get a signal. I was really in a state of stress at that point and anxiety. There was a heart-dropping moment there when a few of us were sitting there thinking, oh no, it probably didn't work. And then all of a sudden,
we started to notice that all of a sudden On the screens of the various individuals, we were seeing real data again.
The spacecraft team basically said, we're in lock, we've got signals.
When the response came back, they realized they'd gotten the engineering data back online from Voyager 1. They had cracked the code.
We have Voyager 1 back again.
The spacecraft came alive for the first time in 5 months. It was remarkable relief.
And there was this tremendous cheer, and everybody was just so excited.
Everybody was happy.
Voyager 1 is once again sailing along, sending back scientific data from all 4 instruments. And now the question is, how much longer can it last?
Joel, as someone who has been reporting on this and has known about Voyager since its, inception, for you to watch this as Voyager seemed to be lost to the far reaches of space, that its time had come, and then for it to then be recovered, what was going through your mind?
I've always loved the Voyager mission, not only because of the great images of the outer planets, but also because it kind of represents a time when those of us who grew up in the space age, I was born the end of 1960 and got to watch the Apollo program take shape and just really marvel at what seemed to be our destiny, which was going to be, we're going to live in outer space. And even I would someday be zooming around to Jupiter and Saturn because we were all going to, conquer this, the engineering obstacles of traveling in space. And it didn't quite pan out that way. I mean, we're not all living across the solar system the way some of us thought. But the Voyagers delivered on their promise. And I think a lot of us feel a certain attachment to it, not only because how distant, the fact that they're so far away, but they've done their job and shown what we and, or really our engineering and scientific experts can do and pull off a really hard mission that no one else has done anything like it.
So what's next for the Voyager? What is its future?
Dr. Spilker and her colleagues will tell you that this science that Voyager 1 is doing is still very valuable and it's unique. It's not reproducible by other means. And so they wanted Voyager 1 going as long as possible because when are we going to send another spaceship out that far from Earth? Not anytime soon. Right now, Voyager is what we got.
How much longer will Voyager be out there doing this work?
There's a limited power supply for the Voyagers, and that power is dwindling. They operate on plutonium, and this power source, should last a few more years, but not forever. There are only 4 scientific instruments on Voyager 1 still operating. Dr. Spilker did say that they probably will have to turn off those instruments one by one just to conserve the dwindling power. And then the Voyagers will be out there in the cold and in the dark, and they'll just be sailing along, and they will be artifacts of what humanity could do in the 1970s, and they have these messages on the golden record. Potentially someone someday or something someday may listen to that and learn about who we are. When you explore and you go places that you haven't been before, sometimes you don't know if it's worth the effort. You don't know if it's worth the expense, the labor. But I think the Voyager mission, that whole project, that's a mission that seemed to reward humanity in ways that cannot be easily measured.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
नमस्कार, विश्व शांति हो.
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم. يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان.
Hola y saludos a todos.
こんにちは。お元気ですか?
Shalom.
Joel, thank you so much for just like sharing your love of this. It's really palpable.
Oh, good. I'm good. I'm glad. I'm just old, you know. Old guys like old things. Old guys like old spaceships.
Joel Achenbach is a science reporter for The Post. He spoke with Elahe Izadi. Back on planet Earth, here's what else I've been following today. The Republican National Convention continues in Milwaukee this week. Martine Powers has been on the ground, getting a pulse from delegates about unity and tension within the party. She brings us this dispatch.
So last night, night 2 of the Republican National Convention, we heard from former opponents of Donald Trump, Senator Ted Cruz, Governor Ron DeSantis, and most notably, Trump's biggest challenger in this year's Republican primary, former Governor Nikki Haley. Before Haley came on stage, while I was walking around the convention and chatting with delegates and attendees, one question kept coming up.
Are you going to boo Nikki Haley tonight when she comes on stage?
Am I going to boo Bird Brain? No, I mean Nikki Haley. You're setting me up for this.
This is Lonnie Leitner from St. Paul, Minnesota, and he has thoughts about Nikki Haley. Haley, of course, was outspoken about her distaste for Trump during the primary. She called him, quote, unhinged. She questioned his fitness for office. She said that making him the nominee would be, quote, suicide for our country. But Lonnie said that he is really trying to put all that behind him now.
Now, Nikki Haley, she was a wonderful UN ambassador. Now, I don't like some of the tactics that she took in the primary race against...
Specifically all the things that she said about Trump?
Yeah, specifically the things that she said about Trump. But you know what? We have to come together now, and we have to unite as a party, because only a united party are we going to be able to beat the Democrats. And people right now say that this is Trump's race to lose, and I believe that. So I welcome Nikki Haley and her supporters, and I'll just have to, sit on my hands a little bit here. So
Lonnie wasn't the only person trying to sit on his hands. Kevin Fulton is from Houston, part of the Texas delegation, and he thinks it's time for Trump Republicans to embrace Nikki Haley once again.
15 to 20% of our party probably shares her viewpoint. Let's not isolate them. Let's bring them in and some of her
But that kind of forgive and forget attitude, as Kevin said, is a lot harder than it looks. He mentioned Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, who's not the most outspoken of Trump supporters. He appeared here at the RNC on Monday.
I can tell you, Mitch McConnell yesterday,
he got booed.
He got booed. Like, for the Texas delegation, which is, as you've seen the first time you're here, we're the loudest. The most dramatic out there. I was proud of us. I turned around and said, I'm really proud of you guys, because everybody kind of just sat on their hands and didn't say anything. There were other states who were booing. We just didn't cheer, but we did not boo.
So how did it turn out for Nikki Haley on Tuesday night?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Governor of South Carolina and Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley.
There were mostly cheers coming from the delegates on the convention floor, with some vocal disapproval from the stands. But ultimately, Haley made her case for endorsing Trump, and she made a direct appeal to those voters who remain skeptical of him.
We should acknowledge that there are some Americans who don't agree with Donald Trump 100% of the time. I happen to know some of them.
She said that you don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him.
We have a choice to make. For more than a year, I said a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for President Kamala Harris. After seeing the debate, everyone knows it's true. If we have 4 more years of Biden, or a single day of Harris, our country will be badly worse off.
Tonight, the theme at the RNC is Make America Strong Once Again. We'll hear from people like Representative Matt Gaetz and Kellyanne Conway, and J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's pick for vice president, will give the headlining speech.
That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Alana Gordon. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Peter Bresnan. Thanks to Stephen Smith. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big political news of the day, check out The Campaign Moment. The podcast is coming to you from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee this week, bringing you incisive analysis of the most noteworthy speeches, the delegate fights, and all of the brewing political battles. You can listen to The Campaign Moment wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Chris Velasco. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.